Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Johan, the host of this channel, Hardcore Spirituality. How is your heart today? Is your heart kind? How is your mind? Is your mind calm and clear? Let's talk about the title of this video. He stopped going to meetings, got drunk. Johan is forced to address it. Let's break it down. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room. On page 26 of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, okay? Well, says the newcomer, I know what you're telling me. I know you're telling me the truth. It's no doubt a fact that AA is full of people who once believed as I do. But just how in these circumstances does a fellow take it easy? That's what I want to know. We're talking about step 2. That, agrees the sponsor, is a very good question indeed. I think I can tell you exactly how to relax. You won't have to work at it very hard either. Listen to this. Listen to these 3 statements. And the first statement is the elephant in the room. First, Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that you believe anything. All of its 12 steps are but suggestions. First, Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that you believe anything. All of its 12 steps are but suggestions. If I ask you right now, what is the meaning of suggestion to you? How would you define it? What is the definition of a suggestion? If someone makes a suggestion to you, what does that mean? Let's see what it says in my 1951 Thorndike Barnhart Dictionary. Suggestion means a suggesting. It's a state of being suggested. It's a thing suggested. It's an indirect indication or a hint. Let's see what the word suggest means, because that's the root of the word suggestion. suggest, bring to mind, call up the thought of, propose, show in an indirect way, a hint, advise, recommend, advise, recommend. Well, Johan, what does this have to do with someone stopped going to meetings and got drunk? Well, I'm going to address it. This video is going to be filled with riddles. A riddle is a puzzling question, statement, or problem. A puzzling question, statement, or problem. A thing that is hard to understand or explain. So you're going to have to figure this out. So the 12-step program is something that we don't demand you follow. The 12 steps are suggestions. They're proposals. They're hints. They're insinuations. Someone is insinuating something. Let's look up insinuate. Push in or get in by an indirect, twisting way. Suggest, indirectly, hint. I'm hoping I could ask you, well, in a way to have an open mind, but to look at this from a different angle. Someone stops going to meetings and they get drunk. Is it because they stopped going to meetings? Or does it have anything to do with what's being said at meetings? You know, the information you're giving new people to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So what's being said at meetings? Well, before I go to this book, remember this one? Good morning, quiet time, morning watch, meditation, and early AA, written by Dick B., one of the first 100 members of AA that recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. He wrote a book. And in here, he's going to address things that are said at meetings, along with another first 100 men and women man, Clarence. Let's talk about something I'm sure you've heard at AA meetings. When someone says, pertaining to what I read in the 12 and 12, the steps are only a suggestion. Someone will say, well, if you jump out of an airplane, it suggested you pull the cord on the parachute. It sounds good, doesn't it? The only problem is we're not jumping out of airplanes, are we? Is that sarcasm, Johan? No, it's not. We're not jumping out of airplanes. On page 75 of the big book, Into Action, it says, we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Could I read it again to you? We are engaged upon a life and death errand. You know, the fifth step, when we take those 3 lists from step 4 that I talked about the other day, the resentment list, the fear list, the sex conduct list, okay? We're not jumping out of airplanes. We don't have to pull a parachute. We're on a life and death errand. So, yeah, AA's only a suggestion, the steps, you know. But we propose, we hint, we advise that if you want to overcome drinking, we advise you give it a try. Okay? Let's go to this book by Dick B. If you have one, it's on page 109. Did he get drunk because he stopped going to meetings? Or did he get drunk? Well, let's use a term that's popular today. Because he received misinformation. Just like we're not jumping out of airplanes. We're on a life and death errand. What else is said at AA meetings? Let's look what those first 100 men and women addressed. History to the Rescue, it's titled. What AAs can learn from their spiritual roots. How to gain a better understanding of God. And several other titles, the author, that's Dick B., one of the first 100 men and women that recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I know, I keep saying that. And several other titles, the author discussed and documented the variety of weird concepts of a God with absurd names that float around the rooms of AA. Should I read it again? Dick B., who wrote this book, who was one of the first 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, that's described on page XII in the big book, says, the author discussed and documented the variety of weird concepts of a God with absurd names that float around the rooms of AA and even pop up in some of its more recent literature. These bizarre ideas emanating from the expressions of AA's expressions of higher power, a power greater than ourselves, and God as we understood him, have evolved into names for some God who is variously called a light bulb, an ashtray, a chair, a bulldozer, a stone, a tree, Santa Claus, the Big Dipper, the group of drunks, good orderly direction, the man upstairs, and even Ralph. The author, Dick B., one of the first 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, the author has heard and read them all. So have many others in and out of AA. So did AA's venerable Clarence S., who was so disturbed about the recent trend that he wrote a pamphlet titled My Higher Power, the Light Bulb. That's sarcasm. What else is said at AA meetings? However, we're on page 110 of this book now, at the bottom. However, one may appraise these recent developments. The statements are factual. Many represent the conference-approved view of today. Such statements often lead to the suggestion addressed to a newcomer, fake it till you make it. Such statements often lead to the suggestion addressed to a newcomer, fake it till you make it. One of the author's young sponsees, remember Dick B., one of the first 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body? Well, one of his younger sponsees is fond of pointing out that he did fake it for 2 years, continued to drink and use, and very definitely did not make it until he began relying on divine help, something the big book suggests as being essential. I'm going to finish this video up. Reading from page 39 in the big book about a higher power, Remember the last thing I read where Dick B. Sponsee said, yeah, he tried that fake it till you make it, and he never made it. I read it again. Such statements often lead to the suggestion addressed to a newcomer, fake it till you make it. One of the author's young sponsees is fond of pointing out that he did fake it for 2 years, continued to drink and use, and very definitely did not make it until he began relying on divine help, something the big book suggests as essential. So divine help, relying on divine help, turning our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Divine help. So I'm going to start on page 39 in the 12 and 12, which is about turning our will and our lives over to the care of God, as we understood Him. Our will is our wants, our desires. So we're turning our wants and our desires over to God. That's our will. Our lives are our experiences. So when we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, we're turning over our wants and desires and our experiences. And we're not jumping out of airplanes. 12 and 12, step 3, page 39. So how exactly can the willing person continue to turn his will and his life over to a higher power? He made a beginning, we have seen, when he commenced to rely upon AA for the solution of his alcohol problem. Did you hear what I said? He commenced to rely upon AA for the solution of his alcohol problem. Let that sink in. Continuing. By now, though, the chances are that he has become convinced that he has more problems than alcohol, and that some of these refuse to be solved by all the sheer personal determination and courage he can muster. They simply will not budge. These problems other than alcohol, okay? They will not budge. They make him desperately unhappy and threaten his newfound sobriety. They threaten his newfound sobriety. These problems other than alcohol. Problems that made his life unmanageable. Remember what the big book says? Alcohol is but a symptom. I read it the other day, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. This is what we're talking about. Problems other than alcohol. Our friend is still victimized by remorse and guilt when he thinks of yesterday. Bitterness still overpowers him when he broods upon those he still envies or hates. His financial insecurity worries him sick, and panic takes over when he thinks of all the bridges to safety that alcohol burned behind him. And how shall he ever straighten out that awful jam that cost him the affection of his family and separated him from them? I want to read that again. And how shall he ever straighten out that awful jam that cost him the affection of his family and separated him from them? His lone courage and unaided will cannot do it. Surely he must now depend upon somebody or something else. At first, that somebody is likely to be his closest AA friend. Well, a sponsor. He relies upon the assurance that his many troubles, now made more acute because he cannot use alcohol to kill the pain, can be solved too. He relies upon the assurance that his many troubles, those things that made your life unmanageable, problems other than alcohol, are more acute now because he cannot use alcohol or kill the pain. But they can be solved too. Of course, the sponsor points out that our friend's life is still unmanageable even though he is sober, that after all, only a bare start on AA's program has been made. More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism and by attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed. But it is bound to be a far cry from permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. So now what? You got problems other than alcohol. Alcohol is only a symptom. We got to get down to causes and conditions. Remember the other day I read, I didn't read it, but I did put it in the down below of the video. What it says from the 12 and 12, talking about character defects and shortcomings, these things that make problem drinkers of us in the first place. Problems other than alcohol, right? So the sponsor's saying, of course, the sponsor points out that our friend's life is still unmanageable. Just because you went to meetings, a few meetings, that after all, only a bare start on AA's program has been made. More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism and by attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed, but it is bound to be a far cry from permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. What does content mean? So, a contented life, a life of content. What does content mean? If you're content, you're satisfied, you're pleased, to make easy in the mind, willing and ready, contentment, gratified, appeased, satisfaction, gratification. Are you happy with your life? Are you going to meetings complaining about everything? Are you content? More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism by attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed, but it is bound to be a far cry from permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. You know, happy, joyous, and free. Page 40. That is where the remaining steps of the AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring the much desired result. Hint, hint. It's a proposal. You know, it's an advisement. Hint, hint. That is where, just where the remaining steps of the AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring the much desired result. What is the desired result? To live happy, joyous, and free, you could say. Then it is explained that other steps of the AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. Then it is explained that other steps of the AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. Are you turning your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him? Or are you sober for a long time and turning your will and your life over to the care of AA meetings and people? And what it's saying here is only when you are persistent with step 3, turning your will and your life over to the care of God, can you practice the rest of the steps successfully. Should I read it again? Then it is explained that other steps of the AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. I'll read it again. Then it is explained that other steps of the AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. This statement may surprise newcomers who have experienced nothing but constant deflation and a growing conviction that human will is of no value whatever. They have become persuaded, and rightly so, that many problems besides alcohol. Should I read it again? They have become persuaded, and rightly so, that many problems besides alcohol will not yield to a headlong assault by the individual alone. But now it appears that there are certain things which an individual can do. So when someone comes to a meeting, I'm not talking about a newcomer, people with time. When they're whining and complaining, about the wife, the husband, the child, the stepchild, the neighbor, the boss, crazy drivers, the lady that bumped them in the back with their cart in the supermarket, are you telling them this? That there are problems besides alcohol which will not yield to a headlong assault powered by the individual alone? Are you telling them, but now it appears there are certain things which only an individual can do? You're limited. All by himself and in the light of his own circumstances, he needs to develop the quality of willingness. Are you telling this to the people that whine and complain? Develop the quality of willingness. When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make the decision to exert himself. When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make the decision to exert himself. Trying to do this is an act of his own will. Wait a minute. Aren't we told our own will, it's no good, keep it out? When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make the decision to exert himself. Trying to do this is an act of his own will. Let that sink in. It seems to me they're saying you have to have a little bit of willpower when you exert yourself to do what? Oh, here's the answer. We're on page 40 of the 12 and 12. All of the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles, and so we trust to God's will. Let me read it again. Because I know when those people come in and complain and whine about the wife, the husband, the kids, the neighbor, the employer, the lady that bumped them in the back of the supermarket, you're not saying to them, those people don't understand you, your wife and your husband are still holding a grudge. You're not telling them that. You're telling them this, right? All of the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles. Conform to their principles. Conform to their principles. And so we trust to God's will. It is when we try to make our will conform with God's that we begin to use it rightly. To all of us, this was a most wonderful revelation. Jeez. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We use willpower. We've just been misusing our willpower. Well, we had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of the 12 steps, and step 3 opens the door. To make what possible? To go from misusing our willpower and bringing it into agreement with God's intention for us. Because I know you're not giving these people that whine and complain, excuse me, I know you're not giving these people advice like, well, they're just resentful, or, you had the right to be angry. I know you're not saying that. You're telling them you're misusing your willpower. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We try to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps, and step 3 opens the door. Once we have come into agreement with these ideas, and the ideas are the spiritual principles in the 12 steps, we come into agreement with them. It's only a suggestion, but once we come into agreement with these ideas, it is really easy to begin the practice of step 3. In all times, when the lady bumps you from behind at the grocery store, when your wife says something that upsets you, when your husband says something that upsets you, the kids don't listen, somebody runs you off the road. In all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, and I know you're telling people that come and, complain about these things this, in all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, we can pause, ask for quiet, and in the stillness simply say, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. A lot of formats in AA ask, before the meeting starts, does anyone have a problem today that might make them want to drink that they didn't get a chance to talk to their sponsor? In formats, at a lot of AA meetings today, before the meetings begin, there is a question. Does anyone have a problem today that would make them want to drink that they didn't get to talk to their sponsor about? Well, I was going to say, I know you forego the format and address that problem and start reading one of these 2 books, the Big Book or the 12 and 12, as it relates to that problem. But that doesn't happen. You're allowed a minute or 2 to say what you have to say and get with somebody after the meeting. We're going to go on with our regularly scheduled program. I have a problem that might make me want to drink. Do you forego the format and address it with one of these 2 books? Or you give them a minute or two to say what they have to say and then say, get with somebody later. Did he pick up a drink because he stopped going to meetings? Or did he pick up a drink? Well, what goes on at meetings isn't really helping recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. You answered a riddle. I'll see you in the next video, hopefully. Johan out. Peace.